Forgiveness is not a theory. It is a real life outcome. And if you walk in it, you get the outcomes of forgiveness. If you don't, you get the negative outcomes of not forgiving. So as we go into this chapter, it's called release, get it. Release is probably the best word for forgiveness. When I'm able to let go, when I'm able to transfer to God, when I'm able to hand these things off, what happens? I make room. And that's what's so powerful. A lot of times people will forgive, but they don't take the next step. And the next step is once you've made room for God, you invite the presence of God in. You take that deep breath, you give that moment of silence, and you allow God and the Holy Spirit to come and to do its work. See, that's what's really powerful about forgiveness done the right way. When I'm hanging on to stuff, I'm blocking out God. I'm blocking the very work of God that He might do. But when I let go, when I release it, I make room for God in a way that He comes. And almost always, when you do the process this way, when you don't just hand it off and then walk away, if when after I've handed it off, I have people stop and I say, now, what is God doing in your life? What are you experiencing? If I get them to slow down and to wait and to be attentive to God, almost universally, they begin to experience the work of God. There's a drinking in of life. And it's this drinking in of life from God that is absolutely transformational. Chapter is titled Release, Get It. Don't just go through a process. Don't just kind of meet the legal requirements. My goal for you, my heart for you in writing this book and in sharing this message to you is release, get it, get all the way there, get it handed off to God, but take the time to drink the life of God in to where now I'm equipped to live life differently. Release, get it. You'll never be the same. Chapter 7, Release, Get It. Finally, it all comes down to this, release. Everything else that I've said about forgiveness is of no value unless there is a letting go of the offense. The dead dog has to be removed. From the beginning, I've given you several tools to help you get to the point of letting go, but ultimately, a tool is a tool. It is something that is an aid. In the end, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and choose to let go. Or we must completely take responsibility for the fact that we are not letting go. If we choose not to let go, we have to own the future that we are going to create for ourselves. Sure, we can be a little frustrated about the fact that we have been put into a difficult situation, but the reality is that it is our spiritual future and the future of the kingdom that is on the line. It is our family's future and our friends. And we have to acknowledge that we are willing to put all of that on the line simply because we refuse to let go and move on. When we choose not to let go, we become prisoners of the past. We allow that thing that hurt us to continue to control our lives from that point forward. That is a rather ridiculous choice. I remember well, after one of the deepest wounds of my life, having to contemplate some of these ideas. Yes, I'm a thinker, and for me, one of the best ways to get to the point of release is to think through the outcomes of what it would mean if I were to choose not to let go. As I was thinking about the intense hurt and pain, All I could do was be angry at the other person who was bringing me that pain. I wanted to scream or inflict some kind of pain on the other person or even do something violent. I was bitter that I had to deal with such a difficult thing and over such an extended period of time. In the end, I finally had to tell myself to change focus. As long as I looked at the situation, I would feel justified. I would feel angry. I would not be able to let go. Instead, I had to turn my gaze to myself and admit that I was feeling sorry for myself for what I had to endure. More than I wanted to admit, it was all about me. I find that owning my future is one of the most helpful tools to get me to a point of release. When I get my eyes off the offense and I truly begin to get my eyes on what God is calling me to do in the situation, things change. It is more fun for the ego to play the games of victim or perhaps of crusader for righteousness, but these games keep us locked up in our own misery. They destroy our future. Yes, it all comes down to this. We either let go of the wound and let God be restored to his rightful place, or we let the wound become our new God, our new center for life. For me, when I start thinking about woundedness from this perspective, letting go gets much easier. It is still a fight, but as I process, I choose to go on. As you might have figured out, I'm both a thinking and a will-oriented person, thus my choice of tools. Most people are a combination of types and thus will have to apply some combination of tools to get to a point of release. That is where each of you must do a little self-analysis and figure out what works for you. There are people who are justice people. These people will not be able to forgive without some sense of God's justice being brought into the situation. Those of you who are like this will be much more likely to need some kind of restitution or at least evidence of change in behavior for you to forgive. Unfortunately, that puts you back in a place where you are totally dependent on the other person's behavior. He has become your God. If you're a justice person, I laid out a picture of God's justice that is always at work behind the scenes in the spirit realm. When a person sins against us and we give it to God, the person now owes God. For the justice person, being able to see this biblical truth is a great help in moving him to forgiveness. But it still comes down to this. He either chooses to let go or he doesn't. Release. We do it or we don't. It is partial or it is complete. When we start to think about forgiveness this way, we are changing the focus back to where it belongs, back to us. None of us has any level of control over another person. Sure, we have influence, and sometimes that influence is significant, but that is all we have. And if God is to be our God and not some point of woundedness, we have no choice but to forgive. It is no longer about the wound or justice or any other thing. It comes down to this. Are we going to let God be God? We don't instinctively see forgiveness that way. We see it from the king's seat. We see it from a lofty vantage point that puts us above the one who has sinned against us. And from that vantage point, we can't see the light of the Word of God shining on our own hearts. We seldom notice that our connectedness to God is quickly slipping away. Oh, what a cost for not letting go. For those who are more emotion-based, the process of letting go is likely to be much different. Instead of thinking through the situation or exercising a choice, the person must emotionally process the painful events. This is very difficult to do with the typical foundations that have been laid in churches for forgiveness. A common teaching is that we just forgive, and when we do, the negative emotions just leave. In Chapter 5, I addressed the fact that our emotions come out of our deepest values center, and that often these emotions don't change quickly. Those who make release dependent on emotional feelings will seldom follow through with the actions needed to feel an emotional release. There is a way for the emotional person to get a clean emotional feeling more quickly. Unfortunately, that too is inhibited by the way we generally teach forgiveness. Our society denies the value of anger. In fact, we almost make it a sin to be angry. That is because most of the anger we see is a very selfish and raging kind of anger, the kind that lashes out at others in a very destructive way. There is another kind of anger. Ephesians 4:26 through 27 says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil." This recognizes the fact that we are emotional beings. It does not tell us to suppress anger, but to get it out of our system as quickly as possible, especially before bedtime. Oh, how much more damage a bitter root does if we go to bed and allow the chewing of an offense to be digested into the deep part of our being. It is so much better if we are honest with our feelings in a way that will bring a cleansing. Unfortunately, the way much of our society views anger cuts off our ability to walk through this emotional cleansing process. Many believe that forgiveness means that what the other person did cannot be judged as evil. These people often hold the idea that anger itself is evil and should just go away with the choice to forgive. Many even say that it is never appropriate to express anger. The reality is that the more emotion-based person will likely need an opportunity to express his anger loud and clear before he will be able to forgive. And it is not just the expression of anger that is needed. He also needs validation that his anger is legitimate and that he has in fact been wronged. That means that a judgment of sin has to occur. Without this, the person feels like nothing more than a raging fool. Modern teachings on forgiveness don't allow any legitimate place for anger because there is no place for judgment. This cuts off the opportunity for real emotional cleansing. In modern counseling techniques, a major part of the process of emotional cleansing is digging up the point of pain, getting the person to talk it through and express even a rage if necessary in order to begin the healing process. Many people are not helped by this process. For some, it seems to deepen the anger and bitterness. If we revisit our pain without getting release, our pain will end up being deeper than when we started. For the thinking or the will-based person, refocusing on the pain only reopens the wound and does little to give release. For these people, shifting the focus to self and to what is best for the future is a better tool. The emotion-based person is seldom capable of that kind of shift. Emotion-based people almost always have to process emotionally, at least on anything that is a deeper level wound. To do this, there has to be a time when the wounded person is holding the violator guilty for the sin that has been committed. I'm not suggesting that there has to be a face-to-face meeting. If that were true, there are many situations that could never be cleansed from the emotion-based person. What needs to happen is some kind of cathartic experience where the person has the chance to rage, maybe even acting out physically in a symbolic way. In Get a Grip, Douglas Weiss, Ph.D., encourages his clients to go through what he calls a cleansing of the temple, which is basically a venting of emotion. In a private setting where damage is not being done to another person, they are free to yell or scream feelings and even use a bat on a mattress or something similar that physically releases energy. Emotion-based people need emotional processing, even as the intellectual person needs his intellectual process. Different tools are needed for different people, but there is one simple rule: get to the point of release. The dead dogs have to go. Get rid of them. Bury them. Without release, all else is of no value. You can learn and never come to the knowledge of the truth. Is that what you want? Or do you want to be free? Release. Get it.